Hey there folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and today is a very special episode. We've got a very special guest that we're interviewing, and we're normally doing this from Victoria or Melbourne, Ben, but we're looking out the window here, and that is the Sydney skyline. So Ben, why are we in Sydney today?
Mate, because we're interviewing the Premier of New South Wales.
Are you kidding me? We're going to talk housing affordability. We're going to talk about leg ups for first home buyers. We're going to talk about red tape and how to avoid it. But Ben, did you sneak something else across the desk?
I pitched an idea. He said, send me some paperwork on it. So you're going to have to listen to the show to find out more about it.
Stick around for that, folks. Let's rip in now.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, Chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and welcome back to you too, mate.
All cameras this time, mate, not just audio. Something very important, something big.
For our audio listeners, that means nothing to them, but
Yes.
we've got a very special guest today. We have been invited to speak to the Honourable New South Wales Premier, Dominic Perrottet.
Yep.
So we are currently looking out the window here of an office, our office at the CBD of Sydney, and we're about to walk down the road to chat with Dominic Perrottet. Easier to say on paper than it is to say in reality, Ben, but we're excited about that.
Yes, but before we get there, Panthers, big win. So it was
Battle
over
of
at
the
half
West.
time. Battle of the West done. So congratulations to the Penrith Panthers. 2 in a row, back to back.
Yes.
And now we look to the cricket season.
GWS Giants are trying to win that battleground, but then you get the two
Yes.
Western Suburbs
Bit
teams
hard.
out there making it a little bit hard. For them. So congratulations to all those
Well done.
Panthers supporters. A couple of things. Stick around for what's making property news. Ben's got a couple of important updates around land tax. Well,
Yep, big news.
big news around land tax. And also, what else, Ben? UK.
Yeah, I'll post the economic update I did on Tuesday. We've got some other news to just sort of clarify what the UK have done. Another back down, let's call it. 2 back downs.
Backflips.
Probably the best way to.
We are going to talk about backflips today. Folks, a couple of quick things before we get into the interview. Summer series.
Yes.
We have had a whole bunch of people put their hands up, and we are wonderfully excited about that. We're going to bring some wonderful stories. But we've done a quick head count, Ben. And it is very skewed to the males and not enough skewed to the ladies. So, ladies,
Please.
100% would love for you to put your hand up, please. Ben and I have had some wonderful conversations from wonderful people over many seasons of Summer Series, but we definitely want to be chatting to you. So if you've got that little pang in your tummy where you hear this and you go, oh, I was going to put my hand up, please do that.
Money management, transformational stories around that. Financial literacy is a big thing. Summer Series is all about organising your finances and then putting them into good shape.
100%.
And set up for momentum into 2023.
Ladies,
So,
we want to hear from you. So
Yes,
please
please.
go to thepropertycouch.com.au/my-story and come there. Okay, my Mindset Minute theme is going to set us up for today's conversation that we're having with the Premier of New South Wales. It's from Steve Cosgroves. Never judge someone by the way he looks or a book by the way it's covered. For inside those tattered pages, there's a lot to be discovered.
love it.
That's going to be important. So I'm going to circle back to that later. But I think you and I should leave, Ben. We've got an appointment with the Premier, so let's go and have that conversation right now. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today. We are talking to the Honourable Dominic Perrottet MP, this New South Wales Premier and Member for Epping in the New South Wales Legislative Assembly. Hard to say, Ben.
Yes.
He previously served as Treasurer in the Berejiklian Government, having first been appointed to the role in January 2017, and again the following re-election of the New South Wales Liberals and Nationals in March 2019. Prior to his appointment as Treasurer, Dominic served as the Minister for Finance, Services and Property alongside Premier Mike Baird. He's married to Helen, and they are the proud parents of Charlotte, Amelia, Annabelle, William, Harriet, Beatrice and Celeste. Welcome to the Property Couch, Premier.
Thanks, Bryce. Thanks, Ben. Great to be here.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you.
It's good you remembered all my kids. I struggle with that.
You are a busy man. I'm thinking I've got 2 boys, and that's a handful.
You get their names wrong occasionally.
I'm sure you could teach me a thing or two. Hey, you grew up in the Hills District. You were educated at Redfield College and Oak Hill College before graduating from Sydney Uni with a commerce and law degree. So before entering Parliament, you worked as a solicitor in the areas of banking, restructuring and insolvency law. So what was your first job out of uni, and Where did the pivot come towards heading towards a career in politics?
Well, I graduated as a lawyer, so I worked as a paralegal straight away and was doing kind of commercial work, and then got a job with Henry Davis York, which was now moved into another firm they've merged in, but in commercial and insolvency law. So I really enjoyed the law and was passionate about it, and actually wanted to become a barrister.
Yep.
That was kind of the long-term plan. And then I'd been involved in university politics. I really enjoyed getting, debating and those types of things. And just before the 2011 election, there was a long-standing member in the seat of Castle Hill, where I kind of grew up in that area, and he called me and said he was retiring. This, by the way, was just as we were coming into government. Yeah. And he said he'd endorse me. So I went through a pretty tough pre-selection battle and was able to be successful. And, the rest is history.
Yeah.
Now, Premier, we obviously start every podcast with a new guest on, where we ask them a little bit about their backstory.
Yeah.
We're passionate about financial literacy and money management.
Yeah.
So what was the discussion of money like when you were growing up?
Well, I grew up in a very large family. I think having 7 kids is big. I grew up in a family of 1 of 12, so dinner time conversations were pretty intense and crazy. Yeah. And my parents always made us, every day, every dinner, present at night at the dinner table on something in the newspaper. We'd have to debate it and present on it. But then a core part of that as well was financial management. And so we'd learn about, opening bank accounts, which they did for us, and savings and doing various chores around the place and building that up. And I think that was incredibly important. And it's something that I was very passionate about when I was treasurer, by setting up a financial literacy program for kids across our state, because I don't think an education is complete if people are leaving school when they're financially illiterate. So yes, there's a lot that parents can do in encouraging, their kids to learn to save. So as they grow up, they understand that responsibility. But also I think the school system has a role to play as well.
And how did you go? Like, were you a good money manager from the start?
I was in jobs yes, because it kind of inspired me. So I was doing paper deliveries. My first job was a milk boy, delivering milk after school in the afternoons. Perfect. Which I loved doing. And then, worked at Pizza Hut and KFC and saved up. And actually when I was in year 10, I'd saved up, my parents obviously kind of, didn't pay for much. It was good responsibility. They were training, and so we went on a study tour in year 10 to Italy and Spain. Lived in Spain and went to school there for a while. I was part of an exchange program, and I funded that all myself through long days at KFC and delivering milk.
Well, it'd be very difficult to fund 12 children to do that anyway. So I think it's
good.
A survival mechanism. Now, housing affordability is going to be a big part of the conversation around the upcoming election for you. But before we go there, you were a big part of the narrative around land tax, the Queensland-based land tax. And on our podcast, we talked extensively about that. And it seems common sense has prevailed. But can you let us know behind the curtain, what was going on for you? You're one of the big critics around not providing information to the Queensland government, and they've since backed down on that policy. What was some of the thought process going on for you?
Well, I was aware of this back when I was treasurer of the state, because the idea had been floated. I can't remember by who at the time, but treasurers had been discussing this idea, to which I thought was a terrible idea. And the mere fact, if a state wants to increase taxes on their people, that's really a matter for them. But the moment they start taxing other Australians outside their state, we've got a real problem in the Federation. So when I'd heard that they had legislated that, and that news came to light late, I'd spoken to the finance minister here, Damien Tudorhope, and said, well, we're just not going to provide the information to them. And my understanding is it only raises around $20 million, but the impact that has on thousands of people who are paying thousands of dollars more in tax, particularly those who are investing in social housing, investing mum and dad investors, self-funded retirees, who have structured their finances in a way for the rest of their life so they're not relying on state governments or federal government support. You can't just go out and whack taxes on them when they've already made those investment decisions. That was the fundamental problem that I had with it. And I think people fail to see that from a Treasury perspective, just increasing tax is a lazy way of managing a budget. And what that has as a result is downstream consequences on so many other factors. And I think that tax was a terrible one. It's great that I spoke to the Premier just before National Cabinet the night before, and we had we get on, and I once again raised my concerns with her, and to her credit, she made the decision to not proceed, and that was good.
Would you have kept the same view if they had a grandfathered it, so everyone had an eyes wide open, okay, going forward?
No, I don't like the idea.
No.
I do not like the idea that a state can issue tax increases on residents of other states. Fundamentally, that runs against the federation. I mean, I'd argue it's probably unconstitutional. I mean, thank goodness we don't have to go and test that in the High Court. But just the concept of that, from my perspective, didn't make any sense, and I think they eventually got there.
Now, Premier, I'm the chair of the Property Investors Council of Australia, which is a non-for-profit association, and I drafted a letter for all premiers and chief ministers around the country to also inform you about the fact that these increases were so significant that it was also going to increase rents in those other states and territories. Because
Absolutely.
if the landlord or the property owner couldn't cover those costs, there was potentially going to be risk. So that just highlights the point. And I made mention earlier around, under the legislation, things like, those types of accommodation that look after the most needy, they were also going to be taxed, whereas in your state, you have an exemption for all of those types of accommodation. So it really was a messy policy. So we just want to say thank you.
No, and this is the thing. There are different, as you guys know, there are different policies in place, different thresholds in place, different rates in place. Our threshold is around 820,000, and people structure their entire lives around this. And when you simply increase taxes in that way, there are significant consequences of that. And particularly at a time when we're seeing interest rates rise, rents are rising, you've got to be very, very careful of the unseen consequences of state government budget management impacting people's lives.
Now, you have a whole bunch of agenda that I'm sure you want to take to the election, but in terms of property specific, can you talk to us about the proposed land tax regime you have for first home buyers?
Yeah. Well, I see stamp duty, and I always have, as the worst tax. And we've got to be fair dinkum here. When stamp duty came in, it was not, it was never seen to be or would be a major tax revenue source for state governments. That was not its intention at the time. It was a basic tax. Now, ultimately, over a period of time, that tax has increased, and state governments have relied heavily on it to provide for services. But it's a terrible, terrible tax. It stops mobility, it stops transactions, and ultimately, it hurts particularly young first home buyers getting into the property market. So we did a lot of work on this when I was Treasurer, and my perspective is, well, if we can get to a point where we can provide people with choice, where they can make their own decisions on their own financial circumstances, then that's the best way to go. Now, that has a budget impact, but ultimately our budget at a state government level is only there to help our families' budgets across the state. So, we'll be introducing legislation shortly in the Parliament, which will provide people an opportunity to pay an upfront stamp duty, which is the current system in place, or pay an annual amount. So what that means in practice, for example, would be on, let's say, an average $800,000 apartment, you could pay $32,000 upfront in stamp duty, or you could pay $1,200 a year. And what that does is it takes that upfront impediment out, which is on average takes people around 2.5 years to save for that stamp duty. By the time they've done that, they're going backwards because the property market has naturally increased over time. So by removing that, it also gets young families into housing that suits their needs, but then they can move to another home and another home after that as they have kids, as their personal circumstances change. They may want to move to regional New South Wales for a few years. That's the system I'd like to have in place. And if we can do that, we can start, hopefully over time, getting state governments less reliant on what I believe is the worst tax in the country.
Now, we're pretty critical of, government tax policies and all of that around that sort of area. And the original policy that you did have potentially created a two-tier market. So we're actually, when we saw this new policy come out, we're actually thinking we support this policy because of the reason that it is for first home buyers. The biggest barrier of getting in is obviously affordability. That needs to be solved in many different ways, supply, all of that type of stuff. But this makes real sense to us. So in terms of the fact that you also have basically free stamp duty for purchases under 600,000, and New South Wales is a big state, not just a Sydney-centric state, so that's awesome. Then you also have obviously a tapered system from 650 up to 800, up 850 I should say, 650 to 850. Now this is this sort of sweet spot for that 850 to 1.5 million. And I think, for Sydney-siders, that absolutely makes sense to me in terms of if this is not my forever home, and it's going to be case by case because ultimately the land portion of a unit is different to a land portion of a townhouse, which is different to a land portion of a house. But it does make sense that if this is about getting on the property ladder and allows you to obviously get on that property ladder over 2 years sooner than potentially you would have got on that and build up that bit of equity. And then so in that next purchase, you can ultimately pay that stamp duty but get into the dream home that you're looking for.
That's exactly right. I mean, this is not to help people with their dream home, it's to help them with their first home.
Yeah.
And our first home buyer concessions do that. They have been successful, but you're right, that's at the lower, up to 850 and obviously below 600, you're not paying anything at all, and that's positive. But there's we know what the Sydney property market's like, particularly it is difficult, and there are a lot more first home buyers now that are paying more for their first home than they would have in the past. Yeah. We also made changes when I was Treasurer at indexing stamp duty rates that hadn't been indexed for a while, so that you're not getting more and more people caught up in higher cost for stamp duty. So all of these things coming together, I think, will provide great benefit. And we can't have an Australia that can't house its children. And this is a real challenge that all governments need to look at. And I'm up for any innovative ideas and solutions that help drive home ownership.
Very good. So the second one is the shared equity scheme trial for up to 6,000 participants. So can you talk through that with us?
Yeah. So we obviously off the back of the federal government's decision, I had an open mind to this. I want to see if it works. We've targeted specifically at frontline service workers. So that's our nurses, teachers, and in addition, single women. Yeah. And the reason we've done that is there may be circumstances where you might have a nurse who wants to go and move to regional New South Wales, that there's that housing available to them, and they can once again potentially, rather than simply being in a rental accommodation situation, that they could get the uplift of the equity in that property. So this is all about creating wealth. We know that the Great Australian Dream is important. I think philosophically from our country's perspective,
100%.
But in addition to that as well, getting people that foot in the property market, the wealth creation that has for every person is significant, and we know that those people who can get keys to their very first home and have that little bit of home ownership, over time they pay it off brick by brick. The discipline that comes with that, rather than paying, as they say, rent money is dead money. Now, not everyone's going to be able to afford a home, but the more that we can do to get people aspirationally into the property market, what a great thing that will have for society.
So going through that, so we're talking about only a 2% deposit for these people. We're talking, I think from memory, it's a 95,000 single income, 120 household income for a couple. So I really love the story about the single women and single parents. I think that's the
target for it.
That's the hard spot. And to credit to the Andrews government in Victoria, when he introduced this policy, I thought this is one of the better policies I've seen down in Victoria as well. So we are a big fan of this shared equity idea. Again, because it's about getting your foot into the property story, and it's very difficult in our more expensive cities to be able to do that. So again, it's another example of a small instrument that we can implement as part of a suite of instruments to help with housing affordability.
And that's the thing, like even if you look at, people may not, like a nurse, a single woman, they might not be there for a substantial period of time, but at least when they leave, they've increased their wealth on the way through. And the same situation occurs with our first home buyers, that if we can get people in the property market 2.5 years earlier than they would otherwise have been, and they stay there for a few years, then 5 years, in that period of time, they've created extra wealth, that's going to help them with their deposit for their next home. So we can't, I always say to my ministers, you've got to ask the question why when it comes to your portfolios. why are we doing things this way? And if you started society again, would you actually have these systems and structures in place? I speak to the Education Minister about school hours. Why do we have a 9 to 3 school hour? I mean, that was set up at a time, over 100 years ago, that if you set up school today, you wouldn't have 9 to 3. And the same thing goes to taxation and the federation and the way that things have just evolved over time, and no one's actually come in there and said, this doesn't work. And to sit there and think that 30% of revenue comes through these inefficient taxes like this, it needs to change, and I think this is a great start.
Those are two initiatives and we agree with them on the demand side, but largely it's about supply.
Yep.
How do we supply more? And so I'm interested to know, you've got some policies that you want to talk through, but first one is the Accelerated Infrastructure Fund.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we've increased that in this year's budget, and I always, politicians always want announcements, right? They want ribbons to cut. So the Accelerated Infrastructure Fund is pretty dry.
I was reading through it. You're not wrong there.
But it's important.
Yes.
And if we can put in that essential infrastructure, sewage, water, the smaller road projects that will unlock supply, then particularly in Sydney as we move further west, and southwest Sydney is booming, well, we can't have a situation where, we might say, we're going to open this up, but we haven't put the infrastructure in. And what I've asked, and for me, this is an important priority for the government, housing affordability. So, I need the transport department and the roads teams within those departments to be prioritising what is a whole of government measure, because I can guarantee you the roads team in government are focused on building major road projects and they've got their own priorities, but I need them to be directing resources into what is the whole of government approach, and that is to drive housing supply. So the Accelerated Infrastructure Fund is all about that. Doesn't cut through much on a nightly news, but you can't build homes without infrastructure. So what I've already seen to date and working with our Planning Minister, Anthony Roberts, has been, developers are coming forward, they're interested in this, and if I can get more zonings taking place, more land unlocked, that's going to drive investment and that's going to drive opportunity. And if you build it, they'll come. And it's not just about building the homes, it's making sure these are great places to live. One of the other things we've done, which we made our first announcement on over the course of the weekend, was particularly in Western Sydney, where it's a major growth area. Our West Invest Fund, where we had the West Connects road transaction, which took place, unlocked $5 billion. We're investing that in communities right across Western Sydney, and that's small projects like small road projects, schools, open spaces and cultural facilities. Because you can't just build homes, you've got to build great lifestyle. Yeah. And then community, and that's what this is all about.
Because I think that's important too, because you've got developers who are, so they need to see that coming, because they need to make a profit. They generally want to do 60 to 80% pre-sale. So they actually want demand to meet supply, whereas I guess the bigger agenda here is to get as much supply as possible so more people can get more affordable housing. So they're kind of at a disincentive unless you provide that.
Yeah, Bryce, we've got to give them confidence. We've got to give them confidence to invest, that the state is coming in and building that infrastructure and is serious about making it happen. And already those announcements have driven a lot of interest from investors and developers, and that's important.
Well, Premier, we know that from the housing associations, the cost, about sort of 40% of new build costs is government fees and charges and, those types of things as well. So that type of infrastructure is critical to reducing that cost, which ultimately means that even though those developers have to make a margin, that's going to bring the price of properties down over time.
And that's the balance, Ben. That's the balance, because when we have these debates around these funds, right, you'll always have Treasury that will say, and I was going to say, as someone who handed down 5 budgets here, that will say, that's really a matter for the developers, but you can't kill the goose that laid the golden egg.
Because they'll pass it on.
Correct.
Yeah.
And or they either won't invest or they'll pass it on in cost. So that's the role the state has to play, and that's why we made those things. There was over $3 billion in housing support, which we put into this year's budget, and that wasn't by accident. that was because it's a key priority to drive, well, yes, there's issues on the demand side that we're addressing, but ultimately the biggest game in town is on supply. And the more we can do and the more the state can partner with developers in getting it done, the better. And we don't want to make it, this is not about giving developers, extra cash that they would otherwise have to put in. It's understanding they've got to make decisions 100%. Of investment.
Yeah.
And if we don't have that price right, and we're not putting that ancillary infrastructure in, they're not going to come. And then we stagnate.
They're not making money if they're not building. And ultimately, if the price is above the affordability range, we need to find ways of bringing that cost down.
Yeah.
And that's a coordinated approach. Speaking of supply, NIMBYism, not easy to say, but you're also going after some of that red tape in terms of how you're trying to be able to get sort of more approvals done, planning approvals done. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in fact, it was a couple of years ago, and there was a former planning minister, Rob Stokes, who was there. And we had what was called a committee that existed called a delivery committee. And I, as treasurer, ensured that the planning teams rocked up to this committee meeting and showed me the time it was taking to get approvals through the system. And because what I noticed was, in fact, it was a funny conversation. What I noticed was that during the budget process, the planning department would always come forward with a request for more public servants. And so I asked Treasury to get me a graph of the increase in the planning department's public service over time and the rate of DA processing. And when the minister came in, I said, well, when I look at this graph, I should actually cut your department in half, because the more people you get, the slower it's becoming to process development applications. So having that accountability, they came in and were able to, over time, by having to answer questions in relation to why things were slowing down, to resolve them. And what we worked out actually was that there were so many approvals that needed to be required from different government agencies that once something had come through, it would then get lost in bureaucratic red tape from agency to agency to agency. Now, the reason that occurred was because somebody in, let's say, who's in fire and rescue or in education or in transport, that wasn't their key priority. And I can understand why, because education's focused on schools, health's focused on providing the best healthcare possible. They're not focused on planning. They're not focused on planning approvals. So once we started to work this out, what we've done and really expedited this is putting timelines on what the time period that is required for every agency to get through those approvals. So things are not getting stuck in red tape and government bureaucracy. So that's been a vast improvement. The other thing we did, which I did with Rob Stokes, because obviously state plays a role, councils play a role, was that with councils, we incentivised them to process their development applications earlier by saying, we will give you extra funding for parks and local amenity on the basis that you meet timelines in respect of application. Now, we weren't saying cut corners. No. We were just saying, here is the application. If it meets all the requirements, it's got to be done in a time that gets projects off the ground faster. So we incentivise councils. That's been successful. And now state governments as well all understand that, yes, they've got a job in a relevant agency, but they've also got a high priority, and that is to make sure things aren't sitting in trays because you don't see it as important, when ultimately it's important for the people of our state.
Now, Premier, you said come to you with great ideas.
Yeah, what have you got? So, what have you got?
Well, this is my final question, but I've got a little backstory on it. A couple of years back, I was in Sydney at a housing affordability conference. And obviously there was a lot of talk about the red tape and all the planning process and so forth. And we were trying to work out a way of how we bring better supply. Now, Bryce and I have been workshopping this for a couple of years, and we just want to pitch it to you. We know that you're responsible for ultimately doing all the planning permits, but here's our radical idea. You ready for it?
Yep.
It's called an override rule, right? So you don't change any of the regular policies in place because they take too long to go to the stakeholders, etc. So the idea is this, that either 1 or 1% of the lots of land within a street will actually get their next productive use approved. So let me give you an example. If you've got a single lot where basically all of the zoning is for single lot dwellings in that particular, one of those properties, up to 1%, will be able to be turned into a duplex. And then if you've got a duplex site, one of those properties on the street can be turned into 3 townhouses. Now, the idea behind this is thinking about it differently, and that is, what are the big objections? The big objections are usually traffic and parking, and then obviously not in my backyard. Now, if you think about that on every street in New South Wales, and across Australia for that matter, not just New South Wales, you're talking about releasing potentially tens of thousands of opportunities to increase the dwelling supply in that location in an established area. So we just thought it's a radical idea.
Radical idea, has some merit, I'd say. And the reason is you've got to take community with you on the journey.
Yeah.
And there's always and I'm a strong believer in keeping community charm and character. That's how development has to occur. In my suburb, they've done it actually incredibly well. There's naturally objections to it, but it's been done in keeping with local amenity and looking at innovative solutions that over time maintains and preserves what's great about a local community, but at the same time increases opportunity to get people into homes. Then let's strike that balance and look at innovative ways of doing it. Because I think there's a balance. Yes, there's always the NIMBYism. Is that the way you pronounce it?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
that's pretty good. That's good. NIMBYism versus the sense, particularly with older Australians, about the importance of their children and their grandchildren getting their keys to their very first home. So the sweet spot is looking at innovative solutions, maintaining charm and character in local communities, and at the same time getting opportunities for young people to buy their first home.
Because you get that 1% cap, and that stops the precedence. Because what actually happens when one property gets knocked over, when it's got a bit of heritage, or then there's precedence, and then they go off to the tribunals and they argue, there's precedence already been set here, so you need to overturn ours.
And that gives confidence to the local community.
Correct.
Then I see
You've
the
got a
merit of the because they know here's where our community will be, rather than the fear that kicks in. Now it's just going to
be carte blanche.
Correct.
That's right. So it's a little radical idea. We'll let it sit for you.
Well, send me through something. I'll look at it.
My final one for you is the proposal around regional housing development program. The commuter belt got stretched through COVID. So what was once considered too far to commute is now being extended. So what are the ideas that you have around that? And with in mind that that commuter belt has been stretched and it'll probably sort of settle back somewhere in between as well?
Well, I think this is a great opportunity for regional towns. We've got so many great areas of New South Wales, but what we've seen over time is some little community towns over time dissipate as people move away. What COVID has taught us is that you can work in remote locations without having to live in the Sydney CBD. And I think that's a positive development. And I know many people, family members, who have moved out to Albury, to Wagga, to live. They love it. And yes, I think we focus a lot on Sydney because that's where the majority of people are. But in every regional area as well, if we can help and partner with those local councils on innovative ways of driving housing supply, I think that's a great opportunity for them. We, once again, preserve the beauty of those towns, but at the same time, they want people. Our regional communities want people to go there. It's a positive thing. It drives small businesses and creates great opportunities. So we do a lot on, government housing, teacher housing, nurses housing. I would expect, for example, that a significant proportion, which I announced, of the shared equity scheme will be in the bush.
Right.
Will be in the bush. And I announced at our regional summit. But we need to work with councils, just like we have with Sydney, in the regions, even though people sit there and think, it's regional New South Wales, property prices aren't as expensive. Well, everything's relative, and the same issues that occur there may occur on a smaller scale than the Sydney councils, but they're just as important. And if we can drive those opportunities to partner with them to build housing, they're going to make them more attractive destinations. That leads to private sector investment, and then it leads to the state investing more in schools and hospitals and the things that matter. And when I go around regional New South Wales now, they're becoming more attractive places because we put record investments in healthcare, in education, and if people, particularly through COVID, know that I can live in regional communities, send my kids to the best schools, and when I get sick, I've got access to the best healthcare, what we'll see is great growth in regional New South Wales.
Premier, thanks very much for your time. It's been wonderful to chat with you, and we know you're a busy man. We could chat all day. I'm sure we've got some other radical ideas to run by you, but thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Bryce. Loved it.
Pleasure. Thank you. All right, folks, so here we are back. We've just had a wonderful conversation with the Premier of the New South Wales.
Spent an hour down at Parliament House.
Yeah.
Learned a lot.
We went through the hallways of history there, Ben.
Yeah, we did.
I said at the top, in my mindset minute, was to not judge a book by its cover. And what I found from that conversation was, if we just take away political bias, depending on which way you swing, the Premier was intelligent, articulate, and what came across is someone who was very interested in the well-being of the community and trying to look for ways for people to get on the property ladder, and that can't be a bad thing, Ben.
I mean, that's the problem, right? In a lot of sound bites that we just get those little sound bites and we form these opinions of people. But what I love about our podcast is that we can have long conversations with people and we can get to know the person behind that. And I think that really came out in terms of the Premier today. He's got a purpose, and he's rolling out some transformation and reform and some new policies that he thinks is going to make a difference. Now, Rome isn't built in a day, and as he said, what got us here isn't necessarily going to get us there. And so he's got some plans, and we got to hear about some of those from the property point of view. And so, thank you, Mr. Premier, for coming on. It was obviously a wonderful opportunity for us to share that.
It was good for us. We've started the podcast on Stiggy's phone many moons ago, and then we got an opportunity to do that. So, a couple of things. We wanted to thank him for sharing the policies that he has in mind for New South Wales. We also want to invite anyone of any political persuasion who wants to come on and do a similar thing where they talk positively about opportunities for change. Not
their policy, not necessarily bagging out other policies.
Not attacking people's policies, but clearly the Premier had an agenda on how he could fix the affordability for first home buyers, and we were happy to talk about that.
Yeah, and look, we will also say if we don't like the policy, we're going to eyeball them on the policy as well in terms of what that's going to do, the unintended consequences. But in terms of the policies that we talked about today, and thinking about, going back to the original stamp duty policy that the government had, this is an opt-in policy for first home buyers. The last one could have been a little bit more difficult and not necessarily, and that uncertainty would have potentially created friction in the property market. So I think
it's taken advice,
correct,
adjusted and put something in that I think for firsties, I think it's good. I think they can get in, they can minimise the amount of capital they need to come up with to make that initial transaction. They can spread it out over time. If their time frame on their first property is short, it means that they would pay less than they would normally pay on stamp duty. So,
and what we need now is them to come out with the calculator. That's just going to help people. And we did hear some rumours that a calculator might be coming out just to help people, because that is the nuance here. But we're sort of saying the sweet spot from the way we read it more broadly is 850 to 1.5 million. If you're getting on the property ladder and it's not your forever home, there's definitely some opportunity here to save some money. We like saving money for firsties, so that's a good outcome.
And it's coup for the Property Catch. The Premier's Department reached out to us to see if they could come on, and it was the first long-form interview that the Premier had done. And I think what I liked about that is we got to understand a bit of the backstory about the human behind. And that's why I did the Mindset Minute, Ben, because it was we got to understand the messenger, which then helped us decipher the message. And that's, I guess, the principle that we talk about on the podcast. So thank you. Hopefully that's been helpful. Give us some feedback on socials on what you thought about having a little listen to the fly on the wall conversation that Ben and I had in the Premier's office a little earlier today. Hey, my life hack today is for you, Ben.
Oh, please help me, Bryce.
So what I want you to do is I called it iWatch, and you mocked me, so I want you to get your Apple Watch out. So I want you to go, I want you to
move a few things. Right, what am I doing?
So do you know when you're, folks, when you're talking along and all of a sudden you ask a question to someone, all of a sudden Siri chimes in, and then the other day Ben goes to me, gosh, that's annoying. Do you know how to get rid of that? Well, Ben, I do know how to get rid of that.
It's happened 100 times to me where it's never actually worked when I wanted it to. But every other time I don't want it to, it says, I can't help with that, or I don't understand what you're saying because I didn't ask you anything.
So a special shout out to...
All right, so what are we doing?
Special shout out from Sam from our team, because he actually helped me get
good. All right, so where do I go?
So what I want you to do is I want you to hit the crown at the... So I'm going to try and work this for audio, right? So if you hit the crown button at the side...
Yep, got that.
Okay, hit the crown and then go and find your settings icon, which looks like the gear.
Settings icon,
Yours is
Still working.
Just take your time, mate.
No,
So there it is, settings.
There it is. Yeah, got it. Yeah.
So hit the settings and then go, I want you to scroll down. I want you to find Siri.
Siri.
Okay, can you see Siri?
Yeah, got it.
All
Tap,
right.
go.
And then there'll be some toggle options.
Oh, listen for
Listen
Siri.
for Hey Siri
Oh,
and
Hey Siri.
Raise to Speak. Can you please turn those two off? So turn them off and then hit the crown button again. Done. That will never happen for you again, folks. So if you actually do legitimately want to use Siri now, what you need to do is you need to hold the crown in
Oh, okay.
and go, Hey Siri. But for the 20 times a year, you
Hey
might...
Siri,
Okay,
who's going to win the 2023 AFL Grand Final?
All right, I'll be interested in this.
I found this on the web.
Well, I can tell everyone what it found. The amount of grand finals that Collingwood's lost. So that's not helpful
No, it
for
says
you.
AFL Grand Final. Only
So,
Melbourne.
folks, so if that has been torturing you, I've now gone, thanks to Ben the other day, so you can now stop those
Love
unannounced
it.
Siri requests. So that's my life hack today, folks. So if you didn't get that, we'll put some details in the show notes so you can work that out. But Ben, what's making property?
Oh, we've got a few things, Bryce, to talk about. Let's start with the UK mini budget.
Yeah.
So I mentioned in my economic and RBA update on Tuesday that they'd basically introduced a little stimulus program,
Yes.
which is not the right type of thing to do effectively.
Aren't we fighting inflation right now?
Well, yes, but also I like the tax cuts. I'm always big on tax cuts, but probably the timing wasn't right. Anyway, they've backed down from that, so let everyone know that that's going to hopefully settle the sort of financial markets around the world. So we'll see what happens there. But obviously the biggest news that if you've been hanging around, we have obviously been on a mission to identify poor policy and call it out when we see it.
Yeah.
And we did do that in a strong way, and I just want to recognise a couple of things. So I'm talking about the Queensland land tax.
Oh, something happened there?
Something did happen there. So late on Thursday, we found out that last Thursday, after we'd produced our podcast for last week, that they were going to put it on ice, as they said. So
Shelve it, Ben.
Shelve it. Yeah. So we don't know whether
It's code for, that's how we save face.
Yes, we get off board, and we basically off.
Hey, if you go back to last week or the
Yes.
week before, you were hinting that there was pressure starting to build around this potential too. So
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, when we did see the Premier of New South Wales, which I do want to acknowledge, we just did that actually in the interview earlier. So there's other people I just want to also publicly acknowledge, and that is Nicola McDougall,
Yes.
who's the chair of the Property Investment Professionals of Australia,
Yep.
and also Antonia Mercorella.
Oh, you did well.
I did okay then. Sorry if I've botched that. Mercorella. I think we got there. So, and she is the CEO of the Real Estate Institute of Queensland. Now, obviously, there was
and your good self.
there was other people who were involved, and they did their piece, and obviously the media also saw it for what it was in terms of poor policy. But the work that we did, and also for our community who filled in that survey, which really made it clear that Queensland property was going to struggle on the back of this, which meant higher rents for people in Queensland and potentially elsewhere. So common sense has won, and I just want to also acknowledge that. So that's obviously the two big news from last week. I want to finish off on just a couple of little stories here, Bryce. The first one is, I noticed in the Fin Review this week that there's a story about an untouched 35-year-old house. So it has not been touched for 35 years.
Surely that wouldn't have gone up.
With a quoted
Untouched.
price of $1.9 million, Malvern East sells for $3 million.
$3 million.
$3 million. And it was a subdivided block on 427 metres of dirt. It doesn't quite compute. I must admit, I had a quick look at it, did a bit of research on it, did some comps, and
Were you the mystery buyer?
no, I definitely wasn't a mystery buyer. Not on that sort of land size.
You did the
For
research.
$3
I was
mil.
wondering if you're buying.
So it's been bought by an outsider. They want to get in that particular market, whether that's street or whether it's the next door neighbour and they want to put a tennis court on it, who knows? But the point being is that obviously always things surprise you, even in downturning markets. That is a stellar result. I think the real estate agent even went on to start saying that the vendors were crying by the end of this. I mean, crying.
I can't work that out. 1.9. It's kind of the hour. What was causing that?
Where's that money coming from? And if it's a principal place to resident, straight to the bank account. There goes, that now we're going to do business class to Europe.
Did the bank economist refute the claim that it went up in value?
Oh, yes. So someone's telling us, no, that's not right.
No,
There's no moving values in Malvern East. And just the last one here, I caught a little note from someone we were catching up with in a couple of weeks' time, Tim Lawless.
Yes.
So we're interviewing Tim from Head of CoreLogic Research. He's calling early 2023 as potentially the bottom. So we're going to get more information on that. So you're going to have to stay tuned for Tim's episode coming up. But I just wanted to put that teaser out. I've just read
pressure
an
on
article.
Tim.
So
You've called it in a couple of weeks. It's actually next week, so he'd better rise to the occasion of that.
My bad. But there you go. So that's what's making property news this week. But what a great show.
It was a great show.
Obviously, yeah, we're doing video for the first time, so that's also a bit weird for me.
Yeah.
But hopefully I've
noticed
you
you
out
using
all
your
right.
hands a bit more when the videos are on.
Mate, I just can't help myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well,
wrap
well
it up.
done.
If I'm using my hands, what does
Okay,
that
that's a
mean?
wrap up. So there you go, folks. Well, it has been a wonderful experience to go into New South Wales Parliament today to interview the Premier of New South Wales and, of course, mate, to riff it with you. So until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
Very good. See you next week, folks.